Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, February 21st, 2022, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria. And before we dive into this week's episode, I do want to thank those of you who make Talk Nerdy possible. Remember, Talk Nerdy is and will always be 100% free to download, and that is because I rely on the support of listeners just like you. This week's top supporters include Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Mary Neva, Brian Holden, Christopher Pitts, Dudas Infinitas, Gabriel F. Jaramillo Gonzalez, June Sapara, Leonard Prince, and Ulrika Hagman. Thank you all so much for your support. If you are interested in supporting the show, all you've got to do is visit patreon.com/talknerdy to learn more. But of course, there are a bunch of other ways to support the show. You can shop at at talknerdymerch.com. You could also rate and review on whatever podcast listener that you use, because of course that always helps whenever we can get up in the rankings. More and more ears, wow, can get on the show. And yeah, it all helps. It all really helps. Thank you all so much. All right, let's talk about this week's episode. It is a fascinating one. We're going to dive into dreams and really, what is the science behind dreaming? What do we know about dreams? So I had the opportunity to sit down remotely, of course, with Dr. Sidarta Ribeiro, and he is a professor of neuroscience and also a co-founder of the Brain Institute at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte in Natal, Brazil. And his new book is called The Oracle of Night, The History and Science of Dreams. So without any further ado, here he is, Dr. Sidarta Ribeiro. Sidarta, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I'm really excited to talk about your book. When it came across my desk, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a topic that it's fascinating to me as somebody who has a background in neuroscience. So my master's was in neuroscience, but then now I'm working towards a PhD in clinical psychology. So of course, dreaming is something that has, I think, possessed the imagination of psychologists and clients for since before it was a field. But at the same time, I am also kind of a pretty firm skeptic. I'm very much a believer in evidence-based assessments and interventions. And I feel like as much as there's some incredible science about sleep and dreams, there's also a lot of pseudoscience out there. And so I'm super thrilled to sort of get to the bottom of this. And I think the first, maybe most important question is not why do we dream, but what is a dream? Like, before we do anything, we should probably define what dreaming is.
Well, so from the biological point of view, dreams reflect the passage of electrical activity through a mesh of neurons that represent experiences, that represent memories, right? So you could say that dreams are basically the reactivation of pieces and bits of past memories. But of course, there is a logic to that. There's a lot of randomness to it. And we could talk about the neurochemical reasons and the neuroanatomical reasons why there's some randomness to it. There's a lot of determination of the contents of a dream based on what the person is actually living, right? And this is where we bridge with depth psychology, let's say Freud and Jung in particular, which defended 120 years ago that dreams are not meaningless. The dreams have a meaning, and this meaning is centered around the person that is having the dream, and it has to do with his or her context. So this activation that causes the experience of having a dream is guided by desires and fears, and this is mediated by dopamine, a specific neurotransmitter. So we can bridge the biological and the psychological levels, but evidently not try to reduce one to the other. So when I say that the dream from the biological point of view is the passage of electrical activity that is guided by dopamine here and there according to desire and fear, this is not to reduce the actual experience of having a dream, which is actually much more than that, right? Because there are many layers to it.
Yeah, I think, I see some parallels with what you're saying between how we define thought, how we define cognition, or even how we define emotion. Like, cognitive psychologists for a very long time have used sort of metaphor and different constructs to be able to describe these things. Neuroscientists have said, this is the emergent property of these specific cells and these specific pathways, and this is what's happening. But neither of those things tell the whole story because both of those things are happening at the same time.
Right on. Yeah.
And so, this idea of memory being an important component, I think, is probably at one time making people who are driving in their cars listening to this conversation shake their heads vehemently up and down. Yes, yes, it's weird how much there are people in my dreams who I know personally, but then there's the bizarreness and the randomness. So it's kind of like there's a memory. It's guided by things we know, things that, as you mentioned, are personally contextual. But boy, howdy, is it not fantastic. Like, people are losing their teeth in their dreams, and they're flying, and my mom was in it, but my mom looked kind of like this other lady I used to know, and so it's much more than just replaying memories.
Exactly. What baffles us and sometimes makes it impossible to make sense of a dream is this hyper associativeness, right? So people change, places change, things are quite labile. Um, this has to do, as I said before, with some very specific molecular and anatomical reasons. For example, during rapid eye movement sleep, which is the phase of sleep in which we have the most dreaming going on, we have negligible, zero actually, levels of norepinephrine being released in the brain. And norepinephrine, and the fact that it's brought to zero has profound consequences in how electrical activity spreads through the through the neuronal mesh. So when noradrenaline, norepinephrine, the same molecule actually, when this neurotransmitter is present, um, the activity tends to follow the most preferred pathways. When it's absent, it's freer. It may spill to pathways that are not commonly used, and they will explain why having a lot of REM sleep can help creativity, can help find remote associates, can help understand anagrams, this kind of stuff. Um, there's also anatomical reasons. So during rapid eye movement sleep, most of our prefrontal cortex is deactivated. Not all of it, but most of it. And this is the part of the brain that we use to make decisions, to inhibit behaviors that are not adaptive, that are not appropriate, to contain impulses, to
Right, it's
basically
our
what we call the executive functions,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And to have short-term memory and keep track of things and keep track of the coherence of things. So when these brain areas are deactivated, the consequence is that in dreams anything goes. In dreams, nothing really surprises you. But we also don't have the feeling in regular dreams. Of course, this could be different in lucid dreaming, but in regular dreaming, we don't have the feel that we are really, choosing the path. Things are happening to the dreamer, right? And there's a certain level of agency, but not much.
Okay, okay. So, I'm interested kind of going back to the norepinephrine phenomenon. So that's obviously a measurable difference between when somebody's in REM sleep and somebody's not. You can see, you can measure that there is less or even no norepinephrine being sort of released into these synapses. Um, this is quite curious to me because the content of dreams very often is stressful. Very often it's nightmarish. And people very often describe experiencing panic, waking up from a dream sweaty, feeling quite panicked, or running from a predator in a dream, something like that. And it's so curious to me that there would be none of this sort of norepinephrine neurotransmitter uh, uh, being released during this content.
But there's dopamine and there's
Ah, yes,
acetylcholine. So there are
yes,
other neurotransmitters, right? Which
right.
will, and do their thing. Um, I think what for us it's hard to make sense of most dreams because we are not living in anything like the conditions in which dreaming evolved over 200 million years in the mammalian lineage, in our mammalian ancestors, and that eventually became human dreaming. Human dreaming is quite special and very different from regular mammalian dreaming because we can share dreams, right? We have rapid eye movement sleep just like other mammals, and they're very likely dreaming as well. But we can share our dreams, so this creates culture. This creates, social action. This creates I have a dream kind of situations, which other animals cannot have. But the essence of the state that is going on in our brains is quite similar to what's going on in our pets, in cats and dogs. The essence of rapid eye movement sleep is pretty much the same, and it will create a situation in which memories are reactivated, but they are reactivated according to the emotions they provoked. And because there is this neurochemical change that allows the activity to be freer, and there is also less prefrontal inhibition, then memories that represent one thing can become associated with another thing and another thing. And in us humans, this becomes metaphors, allegories, teeth that actually represent something else. Now, this doesn't mean that we cannot have dreams that are completely literal, that are
Mhm,
completely,
mhm.
and especially in the case of trauma, people that go to war, people that are attacked by wild animals, people that are attacked by people, they develop memories that are very strong, very negative, and that surface again during, especially during uh, rapid eye movement sleep, as terrible nightmares, repetitive nightmares that actually need treatment. But this makes us think that to understand what dreams are, we need to first understand how they evolved. And they evolved as, and this is what I propose in this book, The Oracle of Night, is that they evolved as a way to, based on yesterday, try to simulate tomorrow, come up with possible futures, and how to deal with that. And in the natural world, this basically means trying to feed yourself and not to become somebody else's food and mate, right? So with those three major, let's say, Darwinian imperatives: to kill something to eat, not to be killed, and to to have offspring. So this is probably the backbone of what dreaming is about.
Okay, so the hypothesis here is that we must remember, integrate, dig deep into sort of these experiences that have been laid down, and then to some extent play, manipulate, look for new kind of connections between these memories and previous knowledge in an effort to plan, in an effort to prepare for future experiences.
Exactly. I give you a very simple example. When I was in grad school, I tell it in my book. When I was in grad school, I used to work in the field center that was 2 hours away from my university, Rockefeller University, New York. And one day I signed up for the car to drive to the field center, and I got there at 7 a.m. and the car wasn't there, and I was really angry. So I had a colleague that hadn't returned the car, and he didn't tell me. So it ruined my experimental day, and I was really angry. And during the day, I was rehearsing, meeting him when he finally came back and telling him how angry I was.
Right.
And so I
Kinda
was,
going over what you were gonna say and how you were gonna
yes,
say it. Yeah,
grumpy and like,
yeah.
and I didn't really think much of his response. I was thinking of my actions, right? Because he was just wrong. Then I go to sleep and I get this. I have this nightmare in which I confront him in very strong words, and he beats me up,
Uh,
just like that.
yeah.
And in real life, he is way stronger and taller than me. So when I woke up in the morning, I was stressed, and I was like, "Oh my god! If I approach him so harshly, he will at least I don't know if he would beat me up, but I mean that's what would happen in the natural world, right?
Right,
If you
if he did beat you up, he would win.
right, sure, for
Yeah,
sure, for sure. And so it
yeah.
was this possible future that I wanted to avoid, and then I became conscious of this, and this thought hadn't crossed my mind, but it was actually quite obvious thing in a world of, as you said before, of praise and predators, and confrontations that are quite harsh. So when I finally met him again, I said I was quite polite, and he was quite polite, and he was fine. This is just an example of a practical thing in your life. So you have a challenge, you have a problem. Dreams are very good at representing those problems. They're not very good at representing problems when you have 1,000 little problems, because this is not how they didn't evolve in a situation of 1,000 little problems. They evolved in a situation of three major problems.
Right, something that's almost more life or death. Yeah, yeah. And you know what's funny is that, of course, me being the psychotherapist that I am, I'm sitting here thinking, "Okay, this is so interesting and, kind of revolutionary that in some ways, uh, understanding this, knowing this, theorizing this can be quite beneficial to an individual who struggles with anxiety and struggles with catastrophization, who lies in bed at night paralyzed by, what ifs and rehearsing all of these, terrible potential outcomes and cannot sleep, that, your mind is going to do this for you. Your mind is going to
Hmm.
work these things out for you during these periods of unconsciousness, and so it's almost like maladaptive to lie there and do it in a way that's not integrated.
Yes, we need to embrace the healing power of the unconscious
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
very concrete manner. In a very concrete manner, there are experiments, for example, from Bob Stickel's laboratory in Harvard. Erin Walmsley was leading that. Published 10, 11 years ago, showing that when people, well, the experiment is like this: they play a video game that is basically navigating a maze, and so it's spatial learning. Then they go to sleep or they stay awake in different groups. And after some time, they are asked, "Did you think about the game or not?" In the case of the people that were awake, or in the case of the people that went to sleep, did you dream about the game or not? And what they found is that the people that stayed awake, irrespective of whether they were thinking about the game or not, they didn't learn much. They got like a very marginal improvement. But among the people that had access to sleep, those that didn't dream about the game didn't get benefits, but those that had dreams about the game got a huge benefit. So what this experiment showed, it's published in Current Biology, very good science. It shows that when you dream about a task, you become better at the task. But that didn't happen by thinking consciously about it all the time and obsessing and suffering. But it happened allowing the body to rest and allowing the brain to do its work.
Yeah, and so there's a two kind of pronged thing happening here. One, you need the sort of integration of going to sleep. You need the ability for your brain to sort of make connections that fly in the face of your conscious sort of cognitions and sort of like creatively integrate. But you also do, it sounds like, need for the topic to be at least salient enough for you to dream about it.
Yes, totally. If it doesn't produce emotions, it's not going to be there.
Right,
It has to.
right,
It
right.
has to do with the negative and positive evaluation of everything that we make, and that's why when we're living a more monotonous situation in life with small challenges, and sometimes we get anxious about small things, right? And it's a problem,
Absolutely.
but
Yeah.
they do not have the same impact in your life. So I give you. Let me go back to some, to my own experience because I think it may help here. Uh, I study sleep and dreams and have been doing it for many, many, many years. But over the course of these years, as I went, say, from my 30s to what now 50, I've been dreaming less and less and remembering less and less. And I noticed it very strong. It's very obvious to me. And I said, "Oh, it's because I'm sleeping too late, so I sleep, earlier, and it's better, but not the same as when I was a teenager." Then I say, "Well, it's because I drank wine before going to bed, and alcohol decreases REM sleep. So I avoid that, and it gets better." But many things that I adjusted in my routine when I do my physical exercise, those things, they help a lot. Okay, but still, even after adjusting for all that, I didn't get back to the same rich, explosive experience of dreaming when I was younger. And I thought of I was starting to believe that this was that this couldn't be changed. And just in the last vacations, I went uh, camping for 5 days in a very wild place, in forest and cliffs and mountains, and no electrical lights, no, really, really away from everything. And in those 5 days, I was dreaming like an animal. I was
Because you
really,
weren't
really
you
dreaming.
weren't very safe where you were.
It was, it was, it didn't feel safe.
Right, exactly.
It
You may have
was.
been safe, but yeah, you had the
Y-
emotional experience of a lack of
Yes,
safety.
exactly. Yeah, no, in fact, it was quite safe. But I mean,
Right.
it was several days of having very little comfort around me, and having to walk for long miles, and having to, and many things that are way closer to the natural world than my regular life. And during those days, I even though I have 1,000 little problems, I only really had one or two or three problems, right?
Stay warm, try not to get
Stay warm,
eaten, don't die
exactly.
in your sleep. Yeah.
Don't twist your ankle, this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, it was a revelation, in fact, because I realized that the main reason why the dream experience gets impoverished, it has to do with the adaptation and disadaptation. And as you said before, it has to do with emotions. If you're risking your life because you're expecting a huge reward and it may not come, or because you're afraid something really bad will happen, dreams will talk about that. They will image that. They will provide food for thought. But if you're having a life that is, just a negotiation of small problems that you kind of already have solved, and if it's very stable, the chances that you're going to have a very strong dream that is very easy to interpret are very slim. You're going to have those dreams that are a mix of things, and you can sort the pieces out. You can say, oh, this thing has to do with that. This thing has to do, I saw that person yesterday. Oh, this is because I had this emotion. This emotion is associated with that person from my childhood. But overall, the whole dream does not have a cohesive unity. It's
Right,
just a
right.
collection of little problems.
And this is where you'll see kind of like pieces of a television series that you may have been
Yeah,
watching
you're like,
integrating
why
into
am I
your
dreaming
dream.
about
Yeah,
this?
yeah. Whereas you're right, whether it's life or death, or it simply has the valence of life or death. So even something
Hmm.
like I'm on the brink of my wedding, or I'm on the brink of
Hmm.
my child being born, or which actually can be life or death, or even,
Yes,
I'm
yes.
I've been up for this promotion and tomorrow's the day that I find out if I got it. These are big deal
Yes, these are
things.
big deal things. Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
exams. Yes,
Exams, oh
medical
my gosh.
exams,
Uh,
tests.
oh
Right. I mean,
god.
those are like classical dreams, right? Everybody had dreams in which you fail at the exam, or you get a bad medical exam. This kind of stuff, and these are
I still
simulations of
get
possible
these dreams.
futures.
Yeah, I still well, now I'm back in school, but I'm all but dissertation now, so it's not like I'm taking tests anymore or anything. But, even before I went back to do my PhD, later in life, I would have dreams, like my stress dreams were still those. I show up to get my, diploma and they say, "Oh, you never took that one class you had to
Yeah,
take.
yeah,
And
yeah.
until you take that, we're not gonna let you graduate." And it was so bizarre because those stakes weren't there in my life, but I think that they had integrated so much as a representation of sort of a lack of accomplishment or working so hard and not quite reaching the
Hmm.
finish line that they
Absolutely,
were yeah,
absolutely.
they had become the sort of archetype for me of that because academia was such a big part of my life.
And I think that in our world, I mean, we're not afraid of being attacked by a lion, right?
Right. Yeah, I never have those kinds of dreams.
But metaphorically, in academia, many times you feel like you're going to be eaten by a lion.
Yeah. And I think interestingly, going back, speaking of academia, going back to what you were talking about the power of having your REM sleep and integrating all of these ideas and making new connections and sort of evoking creative processing. If you're listening, college students, right now, what this means is do not stay up all night and cram. There's a certain
Yes,
point where you need
yes.
to go to sleep because you
This
will
has been
actually do
shown.
better.
This is
Yeah.
facts, right? I mean, we know
Yeah.
that. We know for a fact that if you cram, you will not. First of all, you won't have the performance you want to have, and second, and most importantly, this is going to be dismal down the road. This is the most important thing. It's not even, maybe you can even ace that test, after staying sleep deprived overnight. But then 1 year later, 2 years later, nothing will remain, and we should be focused on long term learning, not on short term learning. It's very clear, and not just for dreaming. Huh? I mean, sleep is the basis of good health. If people that have little sleep, that just stay up late with screens on all the time and wake up early, they are sacrificing years of their life. They're sacrificing their well-being. We're talking everything from cognitive problems and emotional processing problems in the short term to depression, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular problems, and even down the road, Alzheimer's disease. So not to have enough sleep is a really, really bad idea. And if you don't have enough sleep, on top of that, you won't have dreaming because most of the dreaming happens in the second half of the night.
And you have to get there. You have to go
And
through
you
the
have to
phases
get
to
there.
get there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
You have some dreaming in the early phases of the night, but this is the so-called during the hypnagogic states, right? The entrance to sleep has visual experiences, has short dreams, but they're very short. They're not complex stories. They become complex after you slept, say, 3-4 hours of solid sleep. So most people, when they are doing all those things that I mentioned, having alcohol late at night, having cannabis late at night, having using sleep pills or antidepressants, all those things will impair one way or another REM sleep or and the ability to recall dreams.
So, okay, that's I'm gonna put a pin in what you just said about antidepressants because that's an interesting thing I want to follow up on. But I want to ask from a personal perspective. I have been trying to, throughout the pandemic and difficulty with, kind of I don't know, just like self-efficacy and all the things that many people are dealing with like a lack of social interaction. I live alone, and I was starting to feel very like my health was becoming a distant thing from me. And so, what are some of the changes I can make to my routine? And one of the big things that I did is I went back to a previous approach that I had used, and I've now really integrated it, and it's become part of my routine. So at the time when it's time for me to get ready for bed, I take my phone and I put it in my office and I plug it in, and then I go to my bedroom. I brush my teeth, I wash my face, I'll do all that, and then when I get into bed, I journal, I meditate, and then I read. Um, right now I'm reading The Emperor of All Maladies by Siddhartha Mukherjee, not Siddhartha. um, and I kind of like read until I'm starting to get tired or until the time at night when I want to go to sleep every night. So usually I do all this an hour before I need to be asleep. Um, and then I turn everything off, and my head hits the pillow. And I don't read on a screen. I read a physical book with like soft light, like an orangish light. Um, and this has been just like immensely helpful to me. It's helped me with my sleep hygiene. It's helped me with, just like feeling like I'm in a good place. And I'm curious, is this type of like nighttime hygiene something that is preferential for dreaming? Because I never thought about dreams as part of the equation before.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, you could
Okay.
add some things to it. Like
Okay. Yeah.
you could make some auto suggestion before really going to sleep, in which you say, I will have a dream, I will remember it, I will bring it with me, I will report. This kind of stuff makes a big difference. And in many different cultures, in the ancient Egypt or in ancient Greece, and nowadays among Native American groups from Alaska to Patagonia, in all over the world, in fact, Aboriginal populations will go towards dreaming with intention. Not just we Westerners tend to say, well, I had a dream. The dream is something that happens to you.
Right.
And
It's
in many of those
passive.
cultures, they actually, rather than being hunted by the dream, they hunt the dream. They try to catch the dream and propitiate dreams that, for example, will bring a diagnosis or indications of treatment and so on, and new ideas and etc. So all those things can be done. Of course, if people are more prone, they can do it using their religion symbols or entities or whatever. If they are, atheistic, materialistic people, science oriented, they can do it thinking of autosuggestion and just prompting certain kinds of experiences during sleep that will allow you to wake up at whatever 6, 7, 8 a.m. and say, oh, I have this huge experience to report to myself first.
Oh,
And then
very
and then comes
cool.
this very critical moment, which is waking up. This is really the most critical thing, because if you wake up and you move and you talk and you watch anything on screens, you will forget it. You forget it, in a couple of seconds. And this is also because when you wake up, you're still coming from a no norepinephrine zone. You're coming from not having this neurotransmitter that allows us to hold memories tight. So you need to wake and stay awake a few seconds and try to remember. And then you're going to start having more norepinephrine coming, and then you get this memory and it becomes stronger, and then this memory brings what happened right before, and then you bring a story, because then you can unravel this whole thread. But if you move, if you talk about something else, then you say, I had a dream, but I cannot remember anything about it, and this is so common.
So I almost never like I don't look at my screens right away. I don't move right away and I don't talk right away because I don't, I live alone. But I am a snoozer. And does it what is hitting the snooze button do for your
Well,
dreams?
it will give you lots of little dreams, right? It will,
Right.
and eventually, it will many times the sound will be incubated in the dream. So you make sense of it in the
Yeah.
dream, and it becomes something else. But I think it doesn't help because I think let's okay. During the night, we have 4 to 5 full cycles of sleep. So you have 4 to 5 rapid eye movement sleep episodes, and they become longer and longer as the night progresses. So if you wake up from the last one, you're likely to bring a long story, a long dream experience. If you're coming from the first one, when you know in the early hours of the night, you're going to bring something that is simpler. Okay, so it becomes more complex and longer as the night progresses. But if you do this, what you're actually favoring is dreams of the hypnagogic state, dreams of going back to sleep. Then these are less movie and more like a clip or even a GIF.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm meme dreaming now. That's great.
Right.
Okay, yeah, because I long was curious about why, and I think that this has happened throughout different stages of my life. When there were times where I would think to myself, "I don't dream," and then clearly I realized I probably do dream. I just don't
Mhm.
remember them. But there have been
Yes.
huge, like spans of years where I was like, I honestly don't ever remember my dreams.
If we stop paying attention to dreams, they stop coming to our attention. But the interesting thing is that they're coming from such a visceral place. They're like breathing. They're like eating. They're part of what we are. We can live without remembering them, but as soon as you pay any attention to them, they become memorable again. And if you make all those things that we were talking about, they will come back to your life quite quickly, and within one, if you try it once or twice, it's already going to be there, and it gets better and better. So many people come to me and say, "Oh, I never remember any dream," and then once they make some adjustments, they bring 4 to 5 pages a night of dreaming. But what
Yeah.
is most for me, what is most amazing is when you start really writing them down and having a long series of data, that you start understanding the patterns. It's like solving a puzzle. After you have many pieces in place, you start seeing what is still not there, but you start to sense it. And it's quite it gives a lot of insight into navigating one's own life. The challenges, the social challenges, the emotional challenges, the professional challenges, family challenges, they become quite apparent in dreams. And health situations, all that, it's there for us. It's one thing also that I think we need to stress is that everybody that came before us, all our ancestors throughout the ages, back to 3 million years ago, they were relying on dreams for a lot of stuff that we basically decided in the past 500 years or so that we don't need them for anything anymore. We don't need dreams anymore. We most people in the Western world are convinced that they don't need dreaming. So dreaming is not important in their personal life. It's not important in their social life, at workplace, schools. And this is quite anomalous because dreams were very important. They were the center of the social life of everybody that came before, say, you know, René Descartes. Until 500 years ago, in every tradition you looked into, dreaming was very important. And the fact that we lost track of dreaming, that we don't talk about dreams anymore, and that we don't use dreams to for anything really, makes them absent from our society. And I think there's a consequence to that. And the consequence is that we're having a hard time imagining the consequences of our actions.
Oh, absolutely. Having foresight.
Right? We live in a society that is tremendously affluent. There's the amount of capital that has been accumulated in the past decades, not just financial capital, but technological capital, human capital, is tremendous. So why is it that even though we have all that knowledge, most people in the world feel that there is no good future ahead? I think it's part of the problem is that we ditched sleep and dreaming, and we have health problems, and we have social health problems that have to do with the lack of shared dreams.
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, that it's sort of we definitely we know that in a very sort of Western, very capitalistic culture, such as ours in the US, but yours in Brazil, your kind
Hmm.
of across many parts of the
Yeah.
globe, um, that we make a lot of decisions based on the immediate
Hmm.
ramifications and consequences. We don't often
Yes.
think, not from a political perspective, not from a personal perspective, about the effects of our decisions a year, 5 years, 10 years, 100 years down the line.
Exactly.
It's all about the
Exactly.
immediate short-term gain. And I could
Exactly.
see definitely a parallel there. But this leads me to, I think, a question that I grapple with as somebody who studies psychology, as somebody who has like one foot in a very existential humanistic tradition and one foot in a very sort of scientific evidence-based tradition. And that is that, I am not a psychoanalyst. I'm not psychodynamically oriented at all. So,
Mm.
very much Freud and Jung, I feel like there are things I take from it, but there are a lot of things I leave
Hmm.
behind with it.
Hmm.
And I have long viewed dreams and dream interpretation similar to the way I view a Rorschach ink blot test. Like, it can be very informative for personal introspection, for exploration of one's feeling states, personality, desires. But the minute that another person tries to come in and say, oh, this is what that means, I think we're venturing into pseudoscience territory. I think that's a very
Mm.
dangerous proposition.
Mm, mm. I hear you. My take is somewhere in between because
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
the person that can interpret a dream best is the dreamer, and I
Yes.
agree with you in that. But many times we were much better at doing the interpretation if we can dialogue, and we need to
Right,
dialogue with
right.
somebody that exchange ideas with somebody that actually knows our context, and this can be a family member, this can be a psychotherapist, this can be a shaman, but there
Mhm.
has to be a person that is attuned to what matters in that person's life so as to be able to offer likely interpretations. So and there's no reason why we should stick to one. Dreams are hyper associative and they can have multiple interpretations that are, many of them are useful. I think it's about whether it's useful or not, really.
Right,
um,
right.
and sometimes by having a dialogue with people about dreams, we can come up to certain interpretations that were not even proposed by the person. There's one famous example in which Jung has this puzzling dream and comes to his gardener and tells the dream to the gardener, and the gardener says, I think it means that and that. And then Jung
Mhm.
says, no, it doesn't, but now I know what it means.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, there is that creativity and that sort of, play that can only come from the dyad, from the sort of intersubjective,
Yes, yes.
discussion. But I think I worry when I see the books, right? Like, that say or like
Oh,
the
this is BS.
it's
This is BS
BS,
because
exactly.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you cannot in any way say that a specific symbol means anything if you don't
Right.
know to whom.
Right, yes,
This is
like, when
like
your teeth fall out, it specifically
no,
means
yeah,
that you
yeah,
are
yeah, yeah.
facing a terrible
Yeah.
whatever. Yes,
Yes.
it's
Yes. But
bullshit, yeah.
of course, I'm not saying that we do not share. I believe that part of our unconscious is indeed collective in the way that Jung proposed, and there's actually now epigenetics to support it. I think, but to some extent, so we share many things, as you said before. We are all born, and then if you survive, you at some point will mate, and at some point you will age, and then at some those things will happen in everybody's lives, and
Absolutely.
therefore there are common themes. Fine with that. But to say that does not mean that a specific symbol means for sure something for some person. Not at all, right? For if I tell you I had a dream about a shark, you may guess it was a nightmare, but it doesn't have to be. So many ways in
Right.
which it may not be a nightmare. And even if it is a nightmare, what kind of nightmare? What does it mean? It's completely different from a person that lost money with Bitcoin and felt like the sharks ate him or her versus a person that was actually mauled by a shark. They won't. This is going to be very different. But what I contend and where I agree with depth psychology in general in my book, I go at length in defending their legacy, the testable legacy of psychoanalysis and analytical psychology, not the untestable stuff, but the testable, something that can be quantified and has been, in fact, because I believe the dreams are meaningful. To say that they are not meaningful, put neuroscience astray for a long time, and it's back and on track, in my opinion. And I even and I want to go back to the Horshack thing, which is I believe that Horshack tests can be informative and help introspection for that person, but I don't believe they can be extrapolated for anything else. But I don't think
Agree,
that's the case.
completely agree.
But I don't think it's the same for dreams. For example, there's no
Okay.
way in which Mendeleev would have figured out the periodic table through a Horshack test. But the dream actually showed him the pattern. And I think, or Elias Howe, when he invented the sewing machine, that came from a dream. That wouldn't come from abstract thought. It was
Right,
very
because those are
graphic.
external kind of stimuli that are meant to evoke
Yes,
something in
yes,
you.
yes, yes,
But this
yes.
is an internal, it's so
Internal.
much
It's
more
internal.
than just a thought pattern. It's really how, like, I'm curious, and I'm not sure how much sort of you feel sort of confident to talk about this, but I'm curious about the relationship as somebody who in my 20s and actually teens had a lot of fun experimenting with different drugs and psychedelics and things like that. I think back to sort of the way that something like LSD induces a bit of a neuronal confusion, a bit of a neuronal play. How similar or different taking LSD is from just going to sleep and dreaming.
Right. Well, excellent question. In my book, I actually just I talk about two kinds of drugs, right? Drugs that simulate sleep, like sleep
Hmm.
pills, or
Right.
induce sleep, like melatonin, and they have nothing to do with the dream experience. In fact, most of them lead you to the opposite. But there are also drugs that simulate dreams, that are emulate the dream experience, such as molecules in cannabis or psychedelics like LSD, ayahuasca, and so on. Um, so when we look at the literature with those substances, we see, and it's research that has been done in the past 5 years mostly. And my own lab, I work on this. We publish in this field. Um, these substances, both say THC in cannabis and LSD, for example, they will induce synaptic plasticity. They will induce the transformation of neuronal connections. They will induce more brains that will be more changeable, more labile. And this is what sleep does. I mean, there's a lot of parallels there. We have evidence from my own lab that when animals are rats are under LSD, they will be awake and moving around, but their brains will show uh, um, electrical oscillations, patterns of activity that are actually more like sleep.
Yeah. Cool.
So I
Even though
think
they're awake.
we're actually
Yeah.
seeing convergence here from the molecular fields, from the electrophysiological fields of research, and also from psychology, that these substances, they are dreamlike because they promote molecular and cellular changes that are sleep and dreamlike.
Oh, that's interesting. I'd also be curious to see, and this is purely anecdotal, but I'd be curious to see how sort of like high dose, not low dose, not microdose, but high dose MDMA induces changes as well. Because one of my
Yes,
experiences back in
yes.
the day was you take MDMA, you dance, you have this like kind of speedy emotion and this very like euphoric experience. But when you take a lot of MDMA, we would do what we called it X dreaming. That was the phrase that we use, like, oh my God, I just had an X dream, because you would almost lose time. You would be not present. And it would be like, oh, I was just in the car with so and so, and I was telling them they need to change the radio station. And people would hear you. They would be like, you'd be with other people at a party and you go, change the radio station. They were like, what? And you were like, oh my God, I was just in an X dream. Like you would literally be dreaming while you were awake.
Well, there are recent publications showing that MDMA has very similar properties. It's not exactly the same. MDMA has different effects from most psychedelics, and it involves signaling through oxytocin. Uh, but down the road, it has to do with increased plasticity as well. And this is why, in fact, MDMA has been shown to be so effective at helping people with trauma, right? They need to re-signify their pain, and this is so hard to do if you're not in a place of love. And MDMA brings people to the place of love. But if you look molecularly, what's happening is that you're really opening the gates of plasticity. And in a setting, and with, of course, professional people or people that are that are that have been properly trained to make sure the experience goes the right way.
Right, right. Yeah. It's sort of like the clinical and very official version of, planning a fun night of tripping and making sure that there's a babysitter present,
Yes,
which
exactly.
is what a lot of people would do. Yeah.
And I think the work of people like Rick Dobling at MAPS and Amanda
Hmm.
Fielding at the Beckley Foundation and many others, they finally, after decades of research and activism, they have arrived there that science now it has been published in the best scientific journals that these substances can be of help to people that have PTSD, people that have depression, anxiety, and this is, I think, a major change because we're talking about not just drugs, substance, but we're talking about psychotherapy assisted with by drugs that have a very strong effect at very low doses and very
Right.
occasional dosing.
Right, right. And what's curious to me and what's I think so important to me personally is that this is a very specific application that's well studied, that is well controlled. What I worry sometimes about is when, I used to smoke weed all the time. It was a big part of my life. I no longer do it. I was starting to have panic attacks and like negative
Hmm.
consequences from it. But there was a
Hmm.
period in my life when I loved it. But what I worry about is when I see people who sort of hail the benefits of, for example, cannabis as if it's this like panacea. Like, oh, cannabis is great for this and that and this and that. I'm like, wait, 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 there's no evidence to support that. And also, it's actually could be detrimental in certain aspects. And so there becomes this sort of excitement about drugs where very often it's taken to an extreme that unfortunately I
I,
think
I I hear you completely.
it like
I hear
undermines
you.
the actual progress.
Yeah, I think there's two things to consider here. One is that um, those substances tend to benefit people more uh, if they're older, right? I mean,
Okay.
and this is comes back to the dialogue between Leary and Huxley in the '60s.
Mhm.
Um, it's young people have a lot of plasticity going on, and sometimes if they have more plasticity in their brains, this can be quite confusing. Older people actually need plasticity. They otherwise they become they lose flexibility, cognitive flexibility. So I think it's very good for society that older people have access to those substances, and I think we need to be careful with teenagers so that they don't spoil the experience. This is one aspect. The other thing is that these substances, they're sacred in the cultures they came from, and in our society they become completely profane. I'm not arguing against parties, but I think that people to think that those powerful substances can be completely banalized and not used in a, I'm not saying that everybody should be taking for therapeutic reasons. To have fun is also therapeutic, but I think that to treat them with no respect and not really making them a big deal is wrong, because they are a big deal. And the third thing is that when we talk about cannabis, we need to talk about which cannabis, because the effects can be completely different depending on the genetics, and not not only the genetics of the plants, but the genetics of the person.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that you have really put some hard research into, both in your lab and also clearly looking at the literature, is that there's this whole other component. We've been talking quite a bit about dreams. We've been talking about the neurobiology, the sort of molecular biology, and then also maybe more like the cognitive psychology of dreams. But what we haven't really talked about and we've talked about evolution, but we haven't really talked about the genetics of dreaming, the sort of heredity, the gene consequences of dreaming. And this is, you dedicate part of your book to trying to understand what's going on at the level of DNA.
Yes, absolutely. Uh, there's more research, and research that started actually in fruit flies, with showing that there are several genes that can influence circadian rhythms, that can make animals sleep more or less, and so on. There's less research, and this is where my own work comes in, stuff that I began in the '90s and that I continue to this day, which is to understand how does going through sleep and going through specific states of sleep, such as rapid eye movement sleep or slow wave sleep, which dominates the first half of the night, how are those states linked to specific changes, not in the sequence of genes that you have, because this is not going to change, but in how they are expressed and how they are transcribed, translated, turns into protein, and changing neuronal function. And one thing that I discovered and published in '99, and to this day keeps unfolding, is how having a prior experience with novel objects and novel places, and basically, exciting experiences, will make a rat, for example, express genes that are related to learning when the animal enters REM sleep. But if the animal
Mm,
didn't have a new experience to process, none of that will happen. So the brain
interesting.
will express certain genes or not, depending not just on the state it's in now, but on how this state relates to what happened before.
Right, and this kinda
So
takes us back to the video games, and it takes us back to the student
yes,
who is,
yes.
studying before going to sleep at night.
Yes, yes. Now, we still there's so many things we don't understand. So, for example, sometimes you schedule some challenge, and your sleep will process that, and the way you schedule it has a lot to do with whether you're going to form memories or not. I'll give you an example. There are experiments performed by Jan Bohr and his team in Germany, showing that if you train subjects to do two tasks, and then you tell them that the next day they will come and be tested again on both tests, but when they're leaving the lab, they're told by the experimenter in a very nonchalant way that they won't be tested in both of them, just one.
Mm,
So they
mhm,
get
almost
this
like a
this
passing kind of
they're
yeah.
passing, yeah, but we won't do the second one, just the
Yeah,
first.
don't worry
Okay,
about it, you don't actually have
don't
to
worry
put
about it.
yeah, yeah.
But the person doesn't go home to practice because the person doesn't have access to the tasks in his or her computer. It's just, they will come back the next day and be tested. There's no overt thing to do about that.
Yeah,
And
just
the next
memory.
day, just memory. And when they come back the next day, sure enough, they are very good. They're much better now at task one, which they were told would be tested, but they didn't improve at all in task two. So just the fact that they received this bit of information saying this is just because they got this tag not relevant, sleep used that to erase the memory. And this
It's so
proportional to sleep states and so on.
It's so
Um,
interesting, this parallel between the frontal lobe, right, and this ability to attend, this ability to utilize your executor during your conscious waking states, and then this translation to dreaming when the frontal lobe gets quite quiet, but sort of primed you and set you up for this integration.
Absolutely. And integration is a good word because a lot of what happens during REM sleep has to do with integrating information across brain regions, say, for
Mm,
example,
mhm.
hippocampus and cortex. Um, and this integration is necessary for memories to move around in the brain, for memories to mature. Old memories do they're not residing in the same places where new memories get in. There's a constant moving around of memories, what I call gypsy memories. And REM sleep seems to be like a tidal wave of plasticity changes that keep pushing memories away from the hippocampus and placing them in the cortex. And this is a process that is necessary because we need to fit a lot of memories after a few decades. How many memories one has?
Right, right, wow, yeah. Yeah. I honestly we could talk for so many more hours. There's so much more stuff I wanna dig into with you, but I've been keeping you now for almost an hour, and I just wanna know before we start to sort of close up and before I ask you my closing 2 questions, is there anything, in this whole story, A, that we haven't gotten to that you feel like, "Oh my gosh, we didn't even cover this?" And B, is there any sort of takeaway that maybe beyond what you told me earlier about how I can, consciously induce dreaming by thinking, by, really focusing and setting an intention before sleeping. Is there any other sort of news we can use about how to become more aware or become more acquainted with our own dreams?
Well, of course, people are now using all sorts of smart watches to track their sleep, and this is interesting. But I think we need to. This should be helping the sleep dream experience and not become the center of attention. I think the center of attention is the sleep and the dream itself. And so I would say, in a nutshell, is pay attention to what you're going to dream and how you're going to sleep, and what you want to dream before you go to sleep. Pay a lot of attention and dedicate time and effort to rescuing that memory when you wake up. And then share it as much as you can with everybody you like. And make it topic of conversation, because this has a tremendous impact on our ability to remember dreams. If you bring them back in your life, then the next day it becomes much easier to remember, because it's not only you expecting that dream, other people will also want to listen. So here at home, every time I see my children, I tell them, did you bring me a dream? Can you tell me a dream? And this has an effect, because they want to do it. So you put desire
Yeah,
on working towards that. One topic that we haven't covered at all is that when we dream, we encounter people, people that we met,
right.
people that we
Yeah,
imagine, and characters, all kinds of characters. We tend to think that this is not very important, because we tend to think that we are the only person that inhabits our mind. And I want to say that my book actually argues strongly against that, and gives some neurophysiological reasons why we should not believe it. In fact, our minds are populated by thousands of creatures, and we keep encountering them in dreams. In the past, in ancient Greece, in ancient Rome, in ancient Egypt, these encounters were of tremendous consequence. People were meeting their ancestors, meeting gods and goddesses, and getting instructions. And there's very clear historical record showing that. And I've been proposing that we should try to go back to this kind of relationship with our own minds, right? I believe that this is a wealth of relationships that are created inside our minds, in our inner world, that can be tremendously relevant, and promote health. And I want to close with this: that if we were able to sleep better and dream better, this would probably be very healing for people individually, but also for society, which really needs it.
absolutely. Gosh, here, here. So I'm curious now. I always ask my guests the same two questions. They're sort of big picture questions, and I think you may have touched on your answer just now, but maybe there's something else that you would like to share. Um, in whatever context is relevant to you. So obviously this could be informed by your work, but it could also be quite personal. It could be communal. It could be familial. It could be global or even cosmic. I'd love to know, number one, what is the thing that really is, oh gosh, this is funny, keeping you up at night? No pun intended. It's funny. I always ask the same way, and now it has more meaning. What is the thing that really is sort of possessing your mind, making you quite concerned? Maybe even a bit pessimistic or cynical when you're thinking about the future. And then on the flip side of that, so that we could end on a more positive note, where are you finding your optimism and your hope these days?
It's interesting you put it that way. Uh, I I believe that we are drowning in a glass of water, because we have all the means. If we put together the best of knowledge in all different cultures in the world right now, we can make this planet thrive, not just for our species, but for all the other species that we are harming. Because we have all the knowledge that we need, and we should have all the wisdom that we need. The fact that we still didn't do it is appalling. If the 10 richest people in the world had taken 1% of their money towards vaccinating everybody fast in the world in a homogeneous manner, we probably would not be dealing with the pandemic anymore. And the fact that they didn't, and in fact they doubled their wealth, it's, for me, it's a sign that we lost track of something quite important, which is a sense of reality. People are believing that money and things are more real than life,
Right, right.
and this is
Than
crazy.
relationships and experiences.
Yes, this
Yeah.
is crazy, 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 crazy. So I think that you know bad nutrition, bad sleep, no exercise, and toxic relationships, they're getting us, in a very dangerous path, in social dangers, and also, you know uh, c- climate risks that we're facing very clearly. And I think that this lack of insight, especially from the strongest among us, is probably because we're living wrong. Our ancestors, if they had this sort of bad insights, we wouldn't be here. For many, 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 many generations, the strongest were taking care of the weakest. Why is it that the strongest now are just trying to get stronger? So there's a problem there, and I have this feeling that it's related to sleep and dreaming. Um, what makes me optimistic? I tell my friends that I have apocalyptic optimism, because yes, we're facing this challenge. It seems horrible. The Amazon is burning. 800 million people starving in the world. Wars. The pandemic that doesn't seem to go away. But at the same time, we have so much knowledge and wisdom accumulated, and the capital is so accumulated that we're really close to a big change. We're close to a major change, right? Most people in the world say they believe in love and sharing and compassion. We're close to actually getting it, because imagine in the time of Genghis Khan or the Queen Victoria, if she said, "I want to feed everybody in the world," it wouldn't be possible.
Right. Logistically, it wouldn't be possible.
Technically, it was limited, and this has changed in the past few decades.
That's
Now,
true. Yeah.
so now we are, in a way, the most difficult part is done. But now we need to take an extra step, which is to actually, talk the talk and walk the walk. We need to actually make it happen. Everybody's saying, "I'm Christian, so okay, let's share."
Yeah. Yeah. We've got to have the will. We've got to prioritize it. We have to just do it.
We're lacking a common dream.
Yeah. Also, no pun intended. Oh gosh, I'm so inspired. This doesn't always happen at the end of the show. Gosh, thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. The book is The Oracle of Night, The History and Science of Dreams by, I'm going to try this again and see if I can rock it, Dr. Sidarta
Ribeiro.
Sidarta Ribeiro.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Cara. Excellent questions.
Oh, thank you.
You're very welcome.
And everyone listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.